and LEA and their parents as well. The youth separated from the main track, and we were able to work with the youth as a group, and we were able to create an action plan, and they used that action plan, took it back to their district group, and their district listened to the youth's voice, which is extremely important. They were able to voice their concerns within their districts at their schools and what they feel that was most important in order to help them further their education.
All right, thank you, Caitlin. And now we will have Project 10's Lisa Friedman Chavez and Tori Lewis talk to us about transition basics in preparing for college.
Well, welcome everyone. This is Tori Lewis from Project 10. I know that you can't see me on the video. I think they have to do something on their end, but I was wondering, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. And Lisa's going to join us just a little bit later, but we are a discretionary project through the Florida Department of Education, and we have 5 RTRs, Regional Transition Representatives. So if you go on our website, you can find your representative, and we'd be happy to talk with you. Today, we're talking about transition basics, and we'd like to welcome you and thank you for coming today. We encourage questions during this presentation. I'm not sure that I can see them, but I'm sure that Tasha can tell me if they are there.
Yes.
And the goal of our presentation today is to help students with disabilities and their families to know just a little bit more about transition and what it takes to get into college and what happens during high school. So after this training, we think you'll be able to talk a little bit about transition services, talk about transition requirements for individual educational plans, and we call those IEPs. And when they are transition plans, we call them transition IEPs. They really aren't a different document. They are just the same with a few additions. We think you'll be able to know a little bit more about self-advocacy and self-determination and how that really helps in this realm. And we're going to give you some resources supporting family involvement in transition planning. I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but all the research on the importance of family involvement shows that families have an enormous impact on students. What you do really matters. Now, sometimes we are very involved as families when students are in elementary school, but when they get to middle and high, we're not quite as involved. And we've also seen that family involvement in middle and high school really has a positive impact too. And if you see the areas here, higher grades, school success, higher standardized scores, higher self-esteem, so it really helps if our families are involved with our students. We wanted to tell you a little bit about transition services today. And we are getting the information here from the IDEA 2004, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and that is a federal law. And it defines transition services as a coordinated set of activities. It talks about it being a results-oriented process, so you really do have to do something with that. And it's focused on improving academic and functional achievement. Because sometimes when you get a job, the functional achievement is a little more important than the academic achievement. Here's a little bit more about the definition of transition services. It really facilitates school to post-school activities. There are some areas here that we really work on that will help students later in life, but it is based on the individual student's needs. And we really look at the student's strengths, preferences, and interests. We really want the student to have a voice in this process because we're talking about them, and we need to know what's important to them and what they like and what they think they're good at. The focus is really different now from when you're talking about a young student at a meeting where we just talk to the parents. Now we're talking to the student a lot more, and we're talking to the students ahead of time. Transition services also can include instruction, how the student will earn their certain diploma that they are going to get, related services that we're going to discuss a little bit later, any community experiences that they have or may need, talking about employment and other post-school adult living objectives. We want to start from the end and see where the student wants to go and help them get there. And then if appropriate, some students will need information about daily living skills and maybe a functional vocational evaluation later on. Now in Florida, transition planning begins before age 14. It can begin earlier, and we really like that about Florida. But at age 14, we start talking about a few things that we're going to put on the transition IEP. We also invite the student to the meeting, and that's important too. We also talk about post-secondary goals and career goals when we're looking at the IEP. We talk about the consideration of the student's need in instruction for self-determination and self-advocacy. And a lot of students will need that, not even just our students with disabilities, but a lot of students might need information about how to do this and practice in how to do this. The goal is that students, as much as possible, will conduct or give information at their own IEP meetings. They wouldn't have to conduct them. They could do lots of things at the IEP meeting, like read a statement or introduce everyone, but we would like as much involvement as possible in the IEP meetings because, again, the IEP meeting is about them. We're going to talk about diploma designations in the IEP meeting and determine if the student will work toward that. Those designations, they're called scholar and merit. They are additions to the standard diploma. They're not types of diploma. And the decision about these diplomas is determined by the parent or the student if the rights have transferred, if that student is 18. Here's a slide that talks about the steps in quality transition planning. The student is very central in this process, and it starts with transition assessment. And when we talk about assessment, people often think of tests. And in transition, sometimes they are tests, but they're not always. Sometimes more information can be received about a student if you are observing or if you're doing a checklist. And so sometimes in this process, the assessment that we're talking about looks very different than the assessment that you might see when students are younger. We might be talking to their parents, we might be talking to their general education teachers and asking them if they do different things. We might just be observing them when they go out in the community. So the assessment might not be what you're always looking at or what you're thinking is an assessment. We have a common goal here. We want positive student outcomes for all. We believe that all students deserve to graduate high school with the skills that they need to succeed, not just knowing how to read and write, but there are other things that you need to know when you are out there in the working world. And students should have some information on quality transition planning. And we don't want it just to be, cursory. We want it to be important, and we want it to be meaningful for them, and we want to focus on that individual student. So we're not going to be doing the same thing for every student that we might do in a classroom. We're going to be looking at that student as an individual and seeing what they need in this area. Am I doing okay, guys? Do I have questions?
You're doing great.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk just a little bit about high school completion options. A few years ago, these changed a little bit in the state of Florida. We want to look at the needs of students and make that part of the decision when we are looking at completion options. So there are 24 credit standard diploma options now for everyone. Some of those are through access courses, and some of those are through courses that many students would take. And we're going to look and see what's best for that student. But everyone is getting a standard diploma now that is looking for a diploma. And the special diploma has been gone for a while from the state of Florida. We grandfathered those students out, and that is no longer an option. There's also an 18 credit Excel option, and that's not for everyone. That would only be for some students that we thought it was appropriate for. So again, you have to look at the needs of the student. We have some international baccalaureate programs. We call that IB. The Advanced International Certificate of Education, we call that the AICE diploma program. And also a performance-based exit option that most people call the GED. So again, you're looking at what is best for a student. Some students will get a certificate of completion, but that is not a diploma. That is not something we're working toward. That is not something that we would put on an individual educational plan or IEP. We would like everyone to try to get a diploma. Now, there are some resources related to diploma and exit options that we have here for you. And a lot of those are on the Florida Department of Education homepage. We gave a copy of this presentation to the FND people, and they have it. So I'm sure that they can get that to you in case you can't memorize all these long things that we have here. But it is important for you to look at some of these things in writing sometimes. And I did want to highlight Florida Shines. That is a great resource. You can go in that resource. Anyone could go on that resource. It's not just for students in Florida. If you were thinking of getting a diploma, or if you were thinking of entering a college, or just looking at different requirements or options for you, you might want to try Florida Shines and see what they have there. It is free, and all you have to do is register to get on. We wanted to tell you a little bit about deferring receipt of the standard diploma, because it used to be when students were in school, they could just stay until they were 22. And they still can stay if they are needed, if they need that information or they need some more help, but they do have to take a couple steps. And what they do is they defer the receipt of their diploma. This is supported by legislation, and we're going to tell you a little bit more in the rest of the slides. Because the right to FAPE, which is a free and appropriate public education, ends when a student gets a standard diploma, that's why we had to defer now, and we had to jump through a couple hoops. Because when people were getting other kind of diplomas, this didn't pertain. But now that everyone is, what we do is the year in which the student is expected to meet graduation requirements, the school district is going to send the parents and the student a letter, and that's required to be done by January 30th. And then the parent or guardian or that adult student is going to sign a document telling the school district that I'm going to stay in the school district. I'm going to defer. And how we're going to know that is we are going to have an IEP meeting, and we're going to talk about that. I told you that students could stay up to 22. In districts, it's handled in a different way. Some people do that throughout the school year in which you're 22, and some people do it in the semester in which you turn 22. And so you just want to check with your school district. Either way is fine, and they tell the Florida Department of Education which one they're going to do. And they left this very open. If a student needs more help or needs more instruction, and you can see some of the areas there in which a student would need more instruction, they can stay as long as they are telling us that they are going to stay. So there's lots of areas there. Maybe they're going to get some accelerated college credit. They're still in the school district, but they're going to be getting that from the school district, or the school district's going to help them get that. Maybe an industry certification, they're not finished with it yet. Or they're in a collegiate high school program like the IB and AICE that I spoke about. Or they needed more courses to get a scholar designation or the merit designation. Or they're in some kind of structured work study, internship, or a pre-apprentice program. And you may be wondering, how will I know that? Just talk with your school district. All of our 18 to 22-year-old programs that students are in the high school would really fall under all of this. So you just want to talk with the school district and say, should I defer? Is that something that you think would be good for me? And talk with the IEP team and the student, because remember, the student would need to stay and would want to stay if we're going to do this. So it would be a team decision, but the students and parents are really big in this decision. I wanted to talk just a little bit on the selected IEP requirements that are required when a student is 14 and 16 in Florida, because they really focus on transition. When students are 16, we are going to start writing different kinds of goals than you've normally seen on an IEP. We're still going to have those same kind of goals, but we are going to add some measurable post-secondary goals and also some transition services for the student. And we're going to talk about the course of study, how we're going to get the student there, leading to their standard diploma. I already told you the student must be invited. We can't make them come, but we sure would like them to come, because it is important that we hear their voice and they talk about what is important to them. Also, when students are 16, we're going to talk about those long-term post-secondary goals, and some of these areas we might be talking about. They might be in education and training. You know, is a student going to get a job later? Is a student going to be in some kind of education program? We're going to talk about the employment needs of that student. And if the student needs independent living skills, we're going to talk about these too. And it is important to know that all of these goals are going to be focusing on the future. And that's different for parents too. We're used to, you know, in the next year, the student is going to do a certain thing. Well, these are going to all happen after the student leaves the K-12 system. So they're different for our teachers to write too when they're first put in a position to write these kind of goals for older students. At first, it takes just a little bit of education and talking about how am I going to write this goal, because they are very different. To me, they're easier to write than other goals, because either a student went to college or they didn't. They got a job or they didn't. They're easy to measure, and they are what the student tells us they want to do. So they're going to give us the content, and we're just going to write them. They're going to have some transition services also on their IEP. And we're also going to talk about, like I told you, how we're going to get that student there. Maybe they're going to take a different kind of course than everyone else. So it is important for us to see exactly what each student needs. These are also some of the areas that will help our students reach their post-secondary goals. Not everyone will need some of these, like post-school or adult living or daily living skills. They might not need that information, but we're going to look and see. And we're going to write the goals that are important for that student. The IEP process must also include invitations to any agency that's likely to pay or provide some transition services. But in order to do that, the school district is going to ask the parent or the adult student for consent to invite that agency. So you can say yes and you can say no, but you do have to say yes for us to invite someone to that meeting. You can bring anyone you want, but for a school district to invite someone, we have to get your written consent. And it is recommended that the team begins discussing legal rights and responsibilities that are going to transfer at age 18 when the student is 16, because that's going to happen before you know it. And it's going to be a big change. So we want to talk about what's going to happen then, and we want the student to know it also. Now, when students are 17 and 18, we are still going to talk about those post-secondary goals that I told you about, but we may need to update them. Maybe the student has changed their mind. And that's perfectly okay. We all do that. And so we want to just make sure, you know, are you still looking toward this, or is there something else you want to do? At age 17, we are going to tell the student and the parent, guess what? At age 18, the rights are going to transfer to the student. And that's important for you to know, because it's happening in a year. And what's going to happen then? You know, how are we going to handle that? Is the student going to still ask their parent to come with them to the IEP meetings? We hope so, but they also have the option of not inviting you. We're going to tell you about the meeting and they can say, hey, I'd rather they didn't come. In a way that might be good for some students, because they're saying, I've got this and I want to do this alone, but we want to really see what's best for that student. Now, when the student's 18, we're going to tell the student and parent on their 18th birthday or a little before, the rights have now transferred to the student, unless the parent has taken some legal steps to change that. And I'm going to show you this Just Adulting guide in a minute. I'm going to show you the link to that, but that's by the Florida Bar, and that's a written document, but also they have an app now, and I want to show you that in just a minute. And here we go. Lighting the Way to Guardianship is a great book for you all to look at. There's also an online course. It's in English and Spanish that you might want to look at, because some of our families are wondering, you know, should I take some legal action before my student turns 18? You know, do I need to get some guardianship? And so we would like you to look at that before you decide, and talk to people about that before you decide, because it used to be that you just got all of the rights taken away from a student, and we really hate to see that. And maybe the student just needs some guidance in a certain area. Maybe they could do all of their medical needs, but they need some help with banking. So this really helps you to look at it a different way by different areas. And there are also some national resources to help you that way too. But the Lighting the Way to Guardianship is a Florida publication. I talked about this Just Adulting. You just saw the cover. It's called the Legal Survival Guide. And it's really cool now because they have made it an app. And you know how our students like to get those apps, put them on their phones. And it's much better, I think, than a written publication for some of our students. So I encourage you to check that out too, Just Adulting. It has some fun things, some fun quizzes that talk about when you're 18, you know, what happens. I've showed that to some students, and we did have a lot of fun with it. You know, at what age can you get a driver's license? You know, things like that. And they were guessing, and they were having fun with it because it is interactive, and that's what our students like. Also, Planning Ahead, a guide for parents and family members. It talks a little bit more about the legal implications of students who are individuals with developmental disabilities. So that might be something you want to look at that too. And that's been around for a bit, but it's a great resource. My last slide before Lisa takes over here talks about the summary of performance. And that is required by federal law. We call it the SOP. And it is a document that just gives you a summary of some of the things that the student can do, both in their academic achievement and also their functional performance. It's required for students who are graduating or aging out of the system without a diploma. And it is important for students to know about. We want the student to be in on writing this. And the reason why is they can be helpful for students when they go to college, or if they go to a job. They could take this to an employer, they could take this to the disability office at a college and show them some of the things that they can do. We have talked to some of the disabilities offices and colleges now, and they're familiar with this document. They know what it is, so that's a great thing. And we want our students to know too. Sometimes our students forget what it is. We give that to them when they leave, and they ask us for it again, and that's perfectly fine. If you've lost that, you can go back to the school district and say, can I have a copy of my summary of performance? And the reason we want the student in on this is also so they can tell us some information about the accommodations that have been good for them. Sometimes we put accommodations on the IEP that the student decides later not to use. And we would like to know what they thought about their accommodations and which ones they used. And sometimes they have a lot better ideas about accommodations than we do. And they know about some of the things that we don't know about that they could use. So why not? They need to tell us when they're in college. No one's going to follow them around and say, hey, you can get this accommodation. They're going to have to go to the disability office themselves, and they're going to have to decide what accommodations are good. So we want them in on this planning for that purpose. And I am ready to turn this over to Lisa, unless we have questions, Tasha, unless we need to stop for questions now.
Well, we do have one question, and the question is, can I get a copy of this presentation? Thank you, Carmen Rivera, for asking that question. And so that is a question that she has.
Okay, and we did send that to you, Tasha. So can they get that to you, or should they email me?
They can email me, and we can make sure that they receive a copy.
Perfect. I'm glad that somebody wanted it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And I'm going to turn this over to Lisa.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Good morning, everybody. And thank you so much for allowing us to be a part of this presentation today. As Tori mentioned, my name is Lisa Friedman Chavez. I also work with Project 10. Towards the end of the presentation, I'm going to give you a very, very brief tour of our website, a few parts of our website, including where to find your regional transition representative, since there are 5 of us throughout the state. But moving right along, I wanted to share a little bit more information with you regarding self-determination and self-advocacy. Turi had covered some of it, and we have a little bit more information for you all. I also wanted to let you know that there is a complete training that we offer on self-determination and self-advocacy. So this is really just a very brief snapshot, but we can definitely provide more. We also have an entire curriculum that starts all the way back in elementary school. And I don't know, I am able, hold on one second. Okay, there we go. I am able to do video if you would like me to, but it won't allow me to.
Let me check the view options.
So that's fully up to you, to you all. I don't mind just going through the slides either. That's fine.
I think we're okay.
It's okay. Okay, that's fine. Not a problem at all. Alrighty. So a little bit more about what self-determination is. So as you can see, it is a process of taking control and making decisions that affect a person's life. And it does involve multiple components, and we have those components on the next slide. One of those components is self-advocacy. So sometimes people think self-advocacy and self-determination are the same thing, but they really are not. Self-advocacy, you can see by the second bullet, is defined as the ability to speak and act on behalf of oneself. And it really is an important skill for students, not only in the school setting, but also, once they exit the school system. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And right before Turi and I transitioned, she mentioned how important it is for students to also be speaking up once, they're also exiting and going on into college. And you can see the final message on the bottom. It really is critical once you move from the entitlement programs. While students are in school, they are entitled under IDEA, but once they exit, they're no longer under IDEA. They're going to be under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that difference. So this is from the Virginia Department of Education, and I really enjoy this slide because I think it really has a great snapshot of what those core components are of self-determination. And as Turi mentioned, schools have to be working on assessing self-determination and self-advocacy and providing the instruction that the students would need starting all the way back at age 14. We would love to see it happen even earlier than that, but required, starting at age 14. So you can see some of those components. Self-advocacy, we bolded a little bit, so you can see over on the right-hand side, but choice-making, decision-making, problem-solving, that goal setting and attainment, that's critical. And by the way, self-determination is not something just for students with disabilities. This is something that all students need, but it's really important that we help our students become as self-determined as possible because it will help them be more independent and more successful as they, exit the school system and transition into adulthood. And, for the purpose of today, we're talking more about post-secondary education, and we'll give you some examples of why self-determination skills are so critical in that environment. Something I also wanted to put or point out on this slide, you can see on the bottom right-hand side that self-awareness and self-knowledge. I can't tell you how many times I've heard over and over again that there are some students and they're already getting close to exiting high school and they don't know that they have a disability. And if they are not aware that they have a disability, then they're really at a disadvantage when they are getting into higher education because they are not going to be able to disclose and request accommodations. So really important. And also, I know we're not going to be getting too far into employment in this particular presentation, but they're also protected under the ADA in regards to that. And again, if they don't know that they have a disability, they would not be able to disclose to the employer and then request accommodations, which really could help them maintain that job. So on the next slide, you can see there are some ways to advocate and also what you would potentially be advocating. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. So how to advocate, you would want to be assertive. And I like the next bullet, I like to make a little comment about it, but you can see, effective communication, that can be verbal, written, pictures, however that individual communicates. But there are some folks that will be advocating quite strongly, and it could potentially be in a way that is really not effective, or it's in a way that's not appropriate, and that could get them potentially kicked out of a program, fired from a job. So we really do want to make sure that it's effective and appropriate. in the way that they are advocating. Also, negotiation and compromise. And Turi had mentioned this quite a bit, as far as participating in their IEP meetings. That's an awesome opportunity for students to be able to work on those skills. They could be negotiating, compromising regarding the accommodations. They're the ones that are going to be using them. So if there's a particular accommodation that's recommended and they're like, I don't think so, then that's something that the team can discuss, and they can, be empowered to do that. As far as what to advocate, they have rights and responsibilities. And you can see the first bullet, we've talked about that quite a bit. IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, while they're in school. However, once they exit the school system, they then would be looking at the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, and then rights available, of course, to all citizens. And that includes, the right to vote, different kinds of things like that. So those are just a few, not an exhaustive list, but just a few things for them to consider. And you can't see because I don't have the video on, but I just found my fan because I'm a little hot. Anyway, all righty. So how can families support self-determination? This is not an exhaustive list either. It's just a few things that we wanted everyone to be aware of and be thinking about. But first bullet, maximizing personal expectations. There's a wonderful quote about no one rising to low expectations. And sometimes, unfortunately, that could be parents having low expectations of what their son or daughter could potentially do. So want to make sure we maximize those personal expectations to the highest degree possible. Promoting disability awareness. I already mentioned why that is so powerful, so important. When we do the Standing Up For Me, that's the self-determination, self-advocacy curriculum. When we go through that training, there's actually an entire parent component because we want to make sure that parents are educated about self-determination and self-advocacy and the benefit of their students knowing more about who they are, and just promoting that disability awareness. Being aware of strengths, preferences, and needs. And it's such an important topic, and you saw on Turi's slides that that's actually a requirement under IDEA, but some of our students really do not know what their strengths and preferences are. Needs would include those accommodations as well. And for students, if they're applying for a job or if they are trying to get into a program that's very competitive, they really do need to know their strengths. And it's important for them, and I think their self-esteem as well, that they're aware of what their strengths are. Preferences, that's something that's included also in self-determination and knowing what you want. And that's going to impact them in their type of job that they want to get, the living situation, potentially the institution of higher education. The colleges and universities are very different. So even understanding the preferences there. You can see the next bullet, fostering self-respect, self-esteem, self-determination, independence, trying to help them be as independent as possible again. Supporting active involvement of the student in the IEP meeting and transition planning. I think Turi covered that very well. And yes, students have to be invited, and it's wonderful for them to physically be present, but we also really want them to be actively participating to the greatest extent possible. And that's something that can definitely be worked on even prior to IEP meetings, so that we can help them have skills so that they can be as actively participating as possible and effectively participating. And providing those decision-making opportunities. That can include recreational, outings, where they're going to go, what movie they want to see. That can include, what food choices, but different things for them to decide on. Picking out what kind of clothes they're going to wear, but really helping them to make decisions, because that is a skill as well, decision-making. And this slide, I think it's important to understand that, and I'll read it. I'm sure everyone that's participating can understand this as well. But most importantly, families should prepare themselves to accept their child in his or her new adult role and allow their adult children to take an active role in the decisions that will determine their future, even if it means allowing them to make mistakes. And this is from the Pacer Center, which works with families across the nation. And that's sometimes a real challenge to process. That it's a very simple statement on the slide, and it really has a very large reach because it goes into so many pieces. It goes into housing, it goes into employment, it goes into recreational and community living, but really allowing families to help support their son or daughter to be as independent as possible. And it does, we want to try to soften any potential consequence if there is a potential mistake, but it could mean that they are going to make a few mistakes here and there, and they'll see growth opportunities and that learning opportunities. These are some resources regarding self-determination. I'm not going to go into each one of them. We have a little bit of a screenshot of what the I'm Determined logo looks like. And I know from many school districts, I've also heard from families, a lot of them are using that I'm Determined website. We actually have a checklist from I'm Determined in our new family guide, but they have resources for educators, for youth, and for their families. That Chart Your Own Future, How Your IEP Can Help, it's a 2-page guide. Also from the Pacer Center, which we just mentioned in the previous slide. These are all wonderful resources, lots of different links. Actually, the next slide is going to show you some potential, God bless you, videos that you can also check out, but definitely a great resource bank for y'all. So, and one resource that I did not include on the previous slide, but is also fantastic, is the National Gateway to Self-Determination. And they have a section that has videos by the international self-determination, self-advocacy guru, who is Michael Waymire. And you can see that there are 5 different videos. We included the amount of time per each video. And the overarching title for that section is what is self-determination? Why is it important hold on, I have to move my little box there, to people with developmental disabilities. And that is actually the link. And I have to let Tasha and Caitlin know, this slide I changed over the weekend because I noticed that their website was a little bit different, that they had updated it. So this is the only slide though that's different. So I could definitely forward that along to you if someone wants to update it. This is the only one.
Thank you, Lisa.
All right. You're welcome. Exploring post-school options. So these are just a few. And what I like to say when I mention this particular slide, and we have something that's a training called Transition Basics, which really goes over a lot of different areas. But I was at some training once, and the presenter had started off by saying in their state, it wasn't Florida, but in their state, they start their IEP meetings by handing out a blank agenda, a weekly, blank agenda to everyone at the IEP table. And the purpose of that is to remind every single person on the IEP team that this is what we're planning for. Look at that blank agenda, Monday through Friday. This is what your son or daughter's schedule is going to look like once they exit the school system. And keeping that in mind, it is blank. That means there's no transportation. There is not an educational program at the moment. That's something you're going to be planning for. Employment is not necessarily included in there yet. That's something you're going to be planning for. So what is that meaningful life going to look like? That might include a little bit of community service. That could include adult education courses. Definitely recreation and leisure, having them be a part of the community. But I think that is a really phenomenal concept. And I think it also, I could just see folks, starting freshman year with that idea in mind of we're working together as a team. Let's get, we're going to be completing this blank agenda. So by the time it's, that student is ready to exit out of the school system, there's no feeling like a cliff or that the pieces aren't in place. Everyone is working towards the same outcomes that they're all hoping for. So for the purpose of today, we're really going to be focusing on those, the post-secondary education options. So you can see up towards the top, universities and college and the career technical centers. But the others are very important too. I just wanted to make sure that you're all aware that really helps to make life meaningful, and also allows connections with community and potentially other jobs as well. So how can families promote post-secondary education? Are there any questions before I go into this one?
No, I do not see any questions. All
righty. So these are just a few. And again, we have limited time today, but there are definitely other things that families can do to help promote it and assist. And the family guide that we have, and I'll show you where that's located, has some additional suggestions for families. But understanding a student's high school course of study and its impact, we're not going to get too much into it today, but Tori had mentioned about there's no longer a special diploma, but she did talk about the diploma via access courses, which is a modified curriculum. And the on the transcript, the diploma will not look any different. However, the transcript will indicate that the student was taking access courses, the modified curriculum, and that could potentially have an impact on them getting into a particular school or program that they would like. So that's just important to understand as well. Also researching and visiting colleges and universities. I mentioned, and I'm sure that you're all aware of it too, they're very distinct, very different. It depends on the geographical location. You also might be looking if you want something close to the home. There might be a particular program that's not offered at the school close to your home that you are investigating. Disability resource centers, all of the state colleges and universities, because they receive federal funding, have to have disability resource centers. They all are required to provide, the minimum for accommodations. We'll talk a little bit more about that in an upcoming slide. However, many of these post-secondary institutions offer even beyond that. That could include tutoring. That could include things related to the social, emotional kinds of aspects. So it's important to check and see, what else they are able to offer. Something else, what are the admissions requirements, to be getting in housing, the class size, things like that. Exploring cost and financing options. Turi had,
to say for families, to think about transportation.
Yes. And that's actually something that's so gargantuan when, thinking about transition planning, that transportation piece will impact almost everything. That's going to impact the employment, that is going to be impacting the living arrangements, that is going to be impacting their ability to participate in community activities. And yeah, for sure, as far as the college or, post-secondary option, definitely looking at that. There are some that have, if they're moving away from their home, it's important to look at, do they have mass transit, or, and the student is familiar with how to use that. Some of these colleges and universities, they might not have as much of a transportation system. I'm not sure, but yeah, that's an excellent point. It's looking at the transportation, and if it is something that's a need for the student to have travel training, to be working on that before they transition into one of those programs, so that they can be successful once they're there. But yeah, that's something to definitely consider when looking at the program itself, and how much they would support they would possibly need. Exploring cost and financing options. Turi had mentioned Florida Shines. They are awesome. And as far as the cost and financing options, they do have links to FAFSA. We also have a link coming up on a resource slide, but you can compare colleges and universities. And that actually kind of goes into the bullet before as well, but you can select the colleges and universities that you're considering, and they can do a comparison. They can do a cost comparison, and also indicates the number of students that are there as well, and a few other tidbits. But yeah, the cost and financing options from a private school, state university versus one of the colleges, or a community college, and they can definitely vary greatly, as you will notice if you do that particular exercise and research. So again, that developing awareness of strengths, support needs, and strategies, we talked about that, and discussing disclosure. We have a slide, I think it's the next one coming up. No, yeah, okay. So let me talk about this one real quick, and then I'll talk about disclosure. College, career, and life ready. That is what the Florida Department of Education wants every single student graduating with. As far as college and career readiness skills, the ones that you have on the top of your page, those are what are considered those top skills needed for college-bearing courses, but communication and success, within a college or a higher education setting. And those will also help in success in employment. The communication, critical and analytical thinking, time management, those executive functioning skills, intellectual curiosity, just being curious about, learning, and then being committed to learning. Going on to college is really a challenge. So making sure that they have that commitment to learning. We also have legislation that helps in the academic realm of making sure that those skills for reading, writing, and math are in place. And that's actually a link to it, the Post-Secondary Preparation Instruction Curriculum and Post-Secondary Readiness Competencies. So we actually do have legislation there. In regards to disclosing a disability and requesting accommodations, in high school, Turi had mentioned that students are entitled to FAPE. and it's under IDEA. And so their IEP is going to be indicating what they need as far as accommodations or individual assistance. And they have an entire team that are working towards making that happen. However, when students go on to higher education, they are no longer going to be covered and protected under IDEA. They would be protected under the ADA. If a student had a 504 plan in high school, then it would also be Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act when they go on to higher education. So students have to disclose that they have a disability and also meet eligibility requirements if they want to receive appropriate accommodations in that institution of higher education. There's no one that's going to be coming over to them and asking to, oh, do you need an accommodation? Do you have a disability? No, it really is 100% their choice whether or not they want to disclose. And again, that goes back to the self-determination, self-advocacy, knowing, disability awareness, knowing also what accommodations would be helpful. And that summary performance would also help in the process of disclosing and figuring out what accommodations would potentially work. And it's important to keep in mind, some accommodations that the student may have had in high school may not be an appropriate accommodation when they're in college. So really important to check that out. We do have, and I'm looking, yes.
Before you continue, what document would you suggest for individuals with disabilities to bring to the college or tech school that they're going to?
Well, and I also think that it's important to check with the Disability Resource Center at wherever school they're planning to go to as well. But I know that a lot of them like to see the IEP. If they have a 504 plan, they want to see that. The summary of performance also, if it's done well, that's something that should be helping them. Usually sometimes they ask for a psychological evaluation. Vocational rehabilitation can also help with them getting a more recent one if that's needed. And Tori, I don't know if you want to pop in and if there's anything else that you want to add.
No, I think you covered it. It really is important to talk to the college because they are so different.
Yeah. But good question, though. I know a lot of parents and students have that question, too. There is a massive movement across the entire nation for post-secondary programs for students with intellectual disabilities. These would be students that in the past may not have been able to access higher education, colleges and universities. And now they have the opportunity through these different programs. ThinkCollege.net is the first one. That's actually the national organization that helps develop. They provide support. They have a massive website. You can see different programs throughout the country. But that's Think College. We also have two resources within the state of Florida. The first is the Florida Center for Students with Unique Abilities. That's their website. They focus more on students once they have exited the school system. And they also have some financial support for students that are going to these programs. There are scholarships available for programs that are CPPs, Comprehensive Transition Program status, and they also have some money to help programs get started. And also we have the Florida Consortium on Inclusive Higher Education, and both of these websites list the different programs within the state of Florida. And the Florida Consortium on Inclusive Higher Education, they do support both students while they're still in high school on these programs, but also they're knowledgeable about once they exit as well. But that's not the primary focus. I think that the state of Florida has really kind of allowed the Florida Center for Students with Unique Abilities to help, especially because they have that funding stream to help with the creation of those new programs. They also have transition clubs that they are providing funding for high schools throughout the state, and I think that's pretty awesome. So these are just a few post-secondary education resources. I think it's wonderful that the state university system has an entire webpage for services for students with disabilities. You can check out the Florida Department of Education's Career and Adult Education section of their website. They also have a section dedicated to career and technical education. And just a little teeny weeny plug, career and technical education, also called CTE. They have so many fabulous programs and so many different colleges and CTE centers in our state have just great opportunities for our students. So it's not something that I think should be just, poo-pooed or, overlooked. It's something, definitely explore it. That might be the perfect fit for that particular student. They might love it. And a lot of these programs have great earning potential, like fantastic. So if they love it, It's a wonder, there's a need for it. It's a great job, definitely explore it. Florida colleges also have a section for disability support services. There's the link for the FAFSA, which stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. My Career Shines falls under Florida Shines. Tori and I both have talked about that. Also, please be aware that, and Tori, if I missed it, I apologize, but once you log in, once you register for Florida Shines / My Career Shines, you can also have access to over 270 scholarships, which is pretty amazing. So definitely highly recommend that. Publication. Project.
And I would like to add for the FAFSA, for families and for youth that are participating and listening in, that there is a deadline to submit your FAFSA. So if you're looking at going to post-secondary institutions, you want to make sure you're paying attention to those FAFSA deadlines if you're going to utilize FAFSA as one of as a source for funding.
And I have a question. Do I have 5 minutes still? Or yes?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I'm gonna wrap up because I want to show the website real quick. So these are just a few publications. We have the Secondary Transition Roadmap for Families that is available in English and Spanish. I'm going to show you where that is on our website. I'm also going to show you, which I'm so happy about, we do have a new family guide out, and Family Network on Disabilities. They collaborated with, I believe it's the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, and they also have a transition guidebook. We have online trainings available. Tori, I think, mentioned this also, but we have one on graduation requirements. There's a multi-section transition course. Summary performance happens to be one of those. And also there are multiple things that Project 10 regional transition representatives can come and provide training, or we can do it virtually. But you can see graduation requirements, that self-determination, self-advocacy I mentioned. We also do summary performance and transition basics. All right, ta-da! That's our contact information, and I'm going to show it to you again. All right, so very quickly, this is our beautiful Project 10 website. We have a section, just want you to be aware, under what's new. We do have topical briefs, which do include, we've had topical briefs regarding post-secondary education in the past, and lots of information about employment. We've had different topical briefs on graduation success and dropout prevention. So things that you might want to check out over there. I also wanted to look at my little list, make sure I didn't forget something too huge. We have a big bucket. We call these all, oh, of course, my internet doesn't want to work very well. You can also get it from here. We'll just do that. All right, so we have these 8 buckets, and one of them is post-secondary education and training. And once you get into there, it's divided into 2 different sections. So the first section is for planning for post-secondary education and training. So you can see some of those different subcategories there, including financial planning. We talked about that quite a bit, and identifying post-secondary options, because there are so many different things to consider. And then also even going further into detail regarding post-secondary options. For those programs for students with intellectual disabilities, there's an entire subcategory on inclusive post-secondary education. And there's the CTE and vocational training if you're interested in that. Also wanted to show you resources by location. This is where you can find your regional transition representative's contact information. That's us. You heard Tori this morning. That is her contact information. That is mine. But this is how our state is divided. So you can find your RTR, Regional Transition Representative, for your particular region. You can also click on your district and find different resources. We know within, including we have a subcategory. I'm going to click on it super quick. We have, it goes like this. Hopefully you can all see that. Local school district resources, employment programming resources, and then college and university resources. So this is where you can find where the Disability Resource Center would be in that particular area. All right, and last but not least, we have training and publication. I have to move over a little picture there. So for training and publication, this is where you can access our online training. I mentioned our training available on request. We have a publication section. Our secondary transition roadmap is here. That's the Spanish version of it. We also have a brochure if you're ever interested in checking that out. We have a Project 10 website handout, which recently came out over the last month, and that is kind of like a site map of our website. I think it's fantastic. really a great go-to, because our website is fairly new. We updated it. So some people aren't sure where things are located anymore. So that's kind of like your go-to. And this is our family guide. And I'm not going to go through everything. I want to just highlight a couple of things in the table of contents for you to check out. So you can see, let me move this over a little bit more. As Tori had mentioned, there's a whole entire section on transition components of the IEP, section regarding just self-determination and self-advocacy, different responsibilities. So, families are there, but you can see even students have responsibilities, obviously agencies in the school district, increasing the student family involvement. We also included a section on getting a head start, because so many of the things that we're talking about today, including the self-determination, self-advocacy, getting those college and career ready skills, they should be happening already in elementary school. So what are some of the things you can start early to get a head start on the successful transition? Graduation and post-school options, we have an entire section. Tori mentioned about age of majority, a little bit about guardianship and other decision-making alternatives. And we have a gazillion appendices, yay! So these are things I want you to all be aware of. They exist, they are tools for families. I think they help empower families. I love the fact that there is also a contact log. We updated it to make it a little bit more user-friendly from our last version. Things to consider before IEP meetings, also questions to ask at IEP meetings, things to consider when you're doing, planning for transition services. We also have a transition services checklist, which I'm going to show you before logging out. That youth employment skills parent checklist is great. I mentioned about I'm Determined, that website. This is their self-determination parent checklist. And be aware that there's also some guiding questions. It's called Keys to Success, Attitude, Self-Advocacy, and Preparation, post-secondary education guiding questions. So things that parents, families, even schools also can be looking at to help prepare that student prior to them exiting the school system, so they can you want them to be as successful as possible in post-secondary education. And, I brought it to the forefront, and of course now I can't find it. There you go. I tried to make this easier for folks, but I turned out making it harder. But this is what the transition services checklist looks like. So it looks different than what the previous version was. It is only 2 pages, could be printed 1 page front and back, but it allows families to look at by age what is required. Best practices would be italicized, but I think this will be a very helpful tool for students and their families to utilize to know what's coming, and also to just kind of be better prepared, understand what's required, and help them be as involved as possible and actively and effectively participate. I think that's kind of there's so much more, and I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I probably went over too, but that's kind of, I guess, it in a nutshell for us for today.
Well, we just want to thank you, thank Project 10 for coming in and explaining, how we go from, high school to college. And we're super excited to partner with Project 10. We partner with Project 10 around the state of Florida, and just excited to have the guide ready and to have this training. A lot of times we do parent to parent, and we also have youth advocates at Family Network on Disability that do youth to youth. So if you have a youth that needs more assistance in kind of getting those areas together, we also support there. So thank you very much, Project 10.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye. And now we will have our support coordinators for Florida State College, Jacksonville, and University of South Florida. All right. We have Denise. Deborah, are you there?
It looks like we're on mute.
Okay, let me unmute you. That would be great. Let's unmute. There we go.
Denise is here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Denise.
Awesome. Yay.
Okay, can you hear me?
I hear Deb.
Okay.
All right, awesome.
I think we're all set.
Okay, So introductions. Denise is our Florida State College of Jacksonville support coordinator. And we have Deborah McCarthy, who is our support coordinator for University of South Florida. So thank you all for being here with us today, and take it away.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Denise Giarrusso, and I work at Florida State College at Jacksonville. We are what would be considered a community college. A few years back, the Florida college system started offering bachelor degrees at some of the community colleges, and a lot of community colleges changed their name across the state. So we are what would be considered a community college. Do you want to talk a little bit about USF, or should I just start?
Yeah, my name is Deborah McCarthy. I'm the director of the University of South Florida Disability Services Office. We are a 4-year institution, so a few differences, particularly with admission and what families and students can expect when you get to a 4-year institution. USF in particular is a 4-year undergrad institution. We also have any number of graduate students, and we are very large. So there's about 48,000 students within the USF system and probably about 42,000 on the USF Tampa campus.
And with that said, we're a larger community college. We also have our tech center at our college. So as Project 10 mentioned, you really have to explore the colleges within your area and within the state when you're making decisions about transition. So I'll go ahead and get started and make sure the slide's going to advance. Okay, so when you think about coming to college, there are things that must strongly be considered. This is really reinforcing what was discussed in the first part of this webinar. As a student, you need to be self-determined. You need to be mature and independent. You need to be academically prepared, resource savvy, and technologically skilled. And
Denise,
yes.
Really quickly, this is Tasha. Are you going over the PowerPoint, or
did the PowerPoint not advance?
No,
I can't see it.
We can't see it. So yeah,
Okay.
Screen.
Okay, so how do I get it to do that then? I have it on my let me see, display setting. So sharing it. Darn. I thought it was shared. I apologize.
Oh, no, that's okay.
So let me go back to Zoom, I guess. And so share. This will, yes. So let's see. Okay. All right. Let's try that again.
There we go.
All
Is
right.
it sharing?
I got it.
Yes.
Okay.
It is
Okay.
sharing.
I can see it.
Okay. I wish I could. No, I can see it. Let's see, resume slideshow. Let's try that. Okay. So it is up. Just the home slide is up.
Yes.
So Denise, go to view.
Going back to Zoom now. Sharing was paused. Okay, so go back to view.
On the PowerPoint slide, if you go back to view and do view slide presentation,
Yeah.
and then share your screen.
Okay.
Yes, you can click on that one.
Okay, so how do I start sharing again? Let's see. I apologize. New share.
It's sharing on this end.
Okay, so you can see it.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, okay. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Now it looks like it's sharing. Are we good? Okay, perfect. So, again, this is very similar to what was discussed with the Project 10 presentations earlier, but resource awareness, understanding your disability, how it impacts you in an academic setting, and then advocating for the resources that you need. In post-secondary ed, this is a student-driven process. And if you don't make the Disability Resource Office aware that you're having any difficulties, you will pretty much suffer in silence. And we surely in our office, and I know Deb can say the same at USF, we hate to see students fail. We want every student to be successful. So we're hoping that our PowerPoint today will really reinforce these key factors that will help you to be successful in post-secondary ed. So when you're thinking about being self-determination or being self-determined, self-awareness is really, really critical. You have to, first of all, acknowledge that you have a disability because you have to self-report and disclose your disability to the college or university for which you're attending. We have about an hour intake or an interview with every new student, and we talk about their disability, how it affected them in secondary ed, what accommodations work best for them, and then we help to navigate which accommodations will work best for them in post-secondary setting. So that's really, really important. Sometimes we'll have students who are new to post-secondary ed who are afraid to talk with their professors because they fear for retaliation or they're just embarrassed about their disability. Our office will often attend those meetings with the students so that we can help support them in advocating for themselves. And hopefully, as we move on in their college career, the students get more successful at navigating those conversations with their professors without us, and we love when that happens. Often they might need help with talking with an agency. We've had students who needed something that they couldn't afford, but they needed it for the course. And so we will help with advocating to agencies like vocational rehab or DBS. If that's needed, it has to be academically necessary for them to sponsor, but we help the student in navigating that. And also with just feeling comfortable enough to call us in the Disability Services Office and talk about their accommodations, what's working, what isn't. We determine accommodations at the beginning, but sometimes they might not be as effective as the student had hoped. And so it's important that the student know that if they're not working and they let us know, we might be able to explore other accommodations. So very similar to the IEP process, only we don't have IEPs and it's just individualized by each term with the student. So students need to be mature and independent. This cannot be reiterated enough. Students have to let us know that they're out there. They have to disclose a disability. They have to let us know if they change their schedule because we sent their accommodation letters out to the professors who they had when they requested services. So we can't read students' minds. At our college, I serve about 1,280 students and we have 5 coordinators. So you can see that our caseloads are large. We have 5 campuses and 7 centers. So we have a lot of different locations. So it's really, really important that the student keep us informed when they make changes. Students have to request accommodations every semester because their professors change every semester, whereas with the IEP, they requested them once and the IEP is valid for the entire year. So those are just some of the reasons why it's so important that the student be able to advocate for themselves, and they also have to be able to help solve problems. Students come into my office and they want me to give them answers, and we have adult conversations about what they've tried so far, what worked, what didn't work, and then we try and work together to come up with some additional solutions. Because all the problems are individualized, it's important to know there's usually more than one answer to every problem, and students often leave feeling like, wow, you just gave me like 3 or 4 or 5 other things to consider that I never thought of. So it's really important to help them start thinking more broadly when they're in college. Students have to be able to take care of their everyday needs. We don't have nurses at our college. They may at the university, but they're responsible for taking their own medications, taking care of all their activities of daily living. They're responsible for making a schedule and keeping their schedule, reporting to classes on time, staying their entire class, those kind of things. Students have to be able to communicate with others in the classroom. Any mode of communication would be fine, but they're going to be expected to have academic and engaging communications within their classes. And class participation is one of the factors that's often measured in final grading for a class. And so they also have to be able to manage finances. It's really important that they meet payment deadlines. It's heartbreaking for me to work with the student, especially a new student out of high school. Usually we meet with the student and parent, they develop a schedule, and they're all set and ready to go for fall term, and they do this in June, and they forget to pay their tuition by the deadline, and all their classes drop. And have to re-enroll, and by that time all the great class schedule that they had is filled with students paid, and they can't get the same schedule that they had, and it's really, really heartbreaking for the student, and it breaks our heart to see that happen. Being academically prepared, students have to have study skills, time management skills. They kind of go hand in hand, in my opinion. You've got to be able to look at your syllabi for each of your classes for the term and map out exactly how early you'll have to start working on big projects or papers that need to be written, study skills and planning for tests and quizzes and things along that line. In the first term, we often help students with those kind of understandings, or we have a tutor work with the student, but it's really, really important that students learn to become independent in their ability to map out their activities term by term. Students are responsible for reading their textbooks. I always encourage our students, because it's really, really important for them to try and get a week ahead on their reading. Sometimes in college, they might have a big project coming up for one of their classes that puts them behind for a week, and reading assignments are staying current. So if they work a week ahead on class reading and trying on class assignments as they can as well, it helps them to not stumble as much with pitfalls down the road. If students at our college are not always at college level, and so they might test into developmental reading or writing or math courses. We call those preparatory courses. And so it's really, really important, if a student is not reading, writing, or doing math at a college level, it's okay if you test into the preparatory courses. Students feel discouraged because they're not earning credits that are going towards their degree. But I look at it as you're building a foundation so you can be successful in all the other classes that you're going to have moving forward. And by taking those college preparatory classes and putting a good faith effort in and making that, building that strong foundation, you will be much stronger academically moving forward. And so those are really, really important. And then organizational skills. We work with students again on time management, study, and organizational skills at our college, but we can't do that over and over and over again. So we can teach you, and we're hoping that you develop the skills that you can move forward, because you've got to become as independent as possible. But being able to develop, a 3-ring binder for each class or a folder for each class, keeping your materials together, using electronic calendars, or if you use a paper calendar, that's fine, but color coding by class and those kind of tips really help you to be strong with time management and organizational skills. And then resource savvy. Every college and university offers all kinds of resources for students, and students just often don't take advantage of the resources that are available. We have our library and our learning commons. There's interloan libraries between colleges and universities where you can access peer-reviewed journals and articles and books. Also, you can receive tutoring services. We have a computer lab, a place where you can go where you can have the internet if you don't have a computer of your own, a personal computer, or access to the internet at your home. Also a good place because there's tutors and folks there that can help you if you get stuck. Being able to communicate your needs when you go to the library, the learning commons, or to an office, or to a faculty member. Tell them what's going on, where you're stumbling, where your problems are, and they're going to help you to resolve those issues. They'll link you with all the resources that we have on campus. you're struggling with finances, we have a career development center where maybe you could find a part-time job, or you could do work study on campus and earn some money. And so there are all kinds of resources out there, but you just have to know who to ask or where to ask to access them. It's important that you schedule appointments. Like right now, I've been on this webinar for 2 hours, so I'm not available by phone, and I'm not available if you were to walk into my office. But if you scheduled an appointment with me, I was available, so when you came, you would be able to find me at a time when I'm there. Same thing for our faculty. All the faculty list in their syllabi, their appointment hours and their office hours. And so if you get stuck and you need to speak with a faculty member, you can email them or call them. But if it's not during their office hours, you might not reach them at that right time. So it's important that you know that. And I have seen students who, come in at a lower academic level than students who are academic high performers. And I've seen academic high performers flunk out of college, where I've seen students who are lower academic performers do well. And I say that's because of hard work and persistence. I see students who do not give up. They don't take no for an answer. They work 2 or 3 times as hard as their peers, especially sometimes their non-disabled peers, and they will be successful in college. So with hard work and persistence, that is going to take you further than being really, really smart academically, in my opinion, in post-secondary. So being technologically ready, it's important if there's any parents out there or students who are not graduated yet, who have not graduated yet, but maybe are a sophomore, junior, senior, to learn keyboarding, being able to type. You're going to have to type every assignment in college. Everything now is really typewritten. Papers and assignments. We use learning management platforms like Blackboard or Campus. And so everything is submitted electronically as a document. So it's going to be a Word document or a PowerPoint that's typed. And so understanding how to use the internet to navigate it for research, finding resources, using the library, Interloan Library, having the typing skills to keyboard and be able to get through your work quicker and more efficiently. And also, if you use any assistive technology or adaptive technology based on your disability, being independent in your use of your technologies is really, really important. We do loan out some technologies at our college, but it is often better when the student has their own and they're comfortable with their use. So I'm going to pass it on to you, Deb. I think you're next.
Okay. Let me make sure that we take my screen. Give you your
if you want, I can keep advancing the slides if you want.
Okay. Everybody still there?
Yes, we're still here.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of this already. I'm going to breeze through it. I'll be happy to answer questions or stop for questions. I don't necessarily want to repeat everything that everybody else has just said. The first thing to be aware of, and the folks from Project 10 did a great job of explaining this, but the laws that govern the accommodations in college are different. And what is particularly important is that in the high school environment, teachers and the administration are trying to do everything they can to make a student successful. And in college and universities, we do care about student success. We spend a lot of time making sure that students can be successful, but legally what we're looking for is that a student has equal access to the material. So what I tell people is calculus is supposed to be hard, and it may be that when a student takes calculus, they end up not doing very well. That doesn't necessarily mean that the accommodations weren't effective. We do look for what's called otherwise qualified, at colleges and universities, and that makes a big difference when you go to apply to a four-year institution. A lot of community colleges in Florida, a lot of state colleges have what they call open enrollment, and that translates to, as long as you have a high school diploma and you meet their basic admission criteria, they will admit a student. Four-year institutions aren't like that. Four-year institutions have the luxury, because of our structure, of having far more stringent admission standards. So for USF, there are SAT scores, there are ACT scores, there's what they call academic success predictors, how much you were involved in high school, what you did outside of your academics, your academic performance, not only GPA, but what you took and the combination of that. Lots of folks ask questions about the documentation that you would bring to a college or a university. It's always a good idea to check with the university, as has always been said. We do like to look at IEP and 504 plans, but typically, at least for my office, that those as standalone documents, those aren't enough. Usually because the IEP and the 504, what they tell me is that a student has a history of accommodations, but they rarely tell me why. They don't give me a diagnosis. They don't indicate to me what disability it is I'm accommodating. And what the actual disability is, the history of accommodations, and the functional limitations of that disability are the three pieces of information that I need most frequently.
And can I just step in? This is Denise again. We do accept the IEP or 504 plan at our college as preliminary documentation. We will approve the student for testing with extended time. We'll allow them to audio record class lectures. But if they require accommodations beyond that, then we do require a copy of their psychological evaluation. We will take the older psychological from the school system, even if it's not an adult scale IQ, just so that you know.
Right. And at USF, we have similar means to approve what's called provisional accommodations. So if a student has some documentation, or like I recently worked with a student from Haiti or students from New Orleans whose documentation was destroyed in a natural disaster. So there are ways to work around that. But in general, the IEP plan by itself is a good place to start. It's usually not the end all and be all. The other reason for that, from a four-year school, we will very often talk to the student to try to figure out what the long-term goals are, because if the long-term goal is to take the GRE, to go to medical school, to go to law school, to do any kind of advanced schooling that would require nationalized exams, those nationalized exam boards are going to require up-to-date documentation, and they're not going to accept the 504 or the IEP. So part of what we're trying to do is set the student up to have what they'll need in the future. Some good information about how accommodations are shared. Prior to university, I think a lot of students are used to the teachers knowing that the student has an accommodation plan, and understanding that the teachers have talked about that. And at colleges and universities, it is the student who lets the faculty member know that there are accommodations. Even if a student registers with me, I do not contact that faculty member unless there are some extenuating circumstances, such as I have to put an interpreter in that room because a student is deaf. In general, it is the student's responsibility to talk to an instructor. Like Denise said, we spend a lot of time role-playing with students. We can certainly assist with that conversation, but it is the student who is bringing that information forward. I think we've talked a lot about advocacy already. The important thing to remember is that at a college or university, even if a parent has guardianship of a student, we will defer to what we do for all students, which is we initiate conversation with the student first. So if you're a parent and you have guardianship, if you initiate and the student has signed a release form, with the Disability Services Office. If you initiate contact with us, we can answer your questions. When I initiate contact, it's always going to be with the student. Sometimes the student will be sitting in my office and we will call a parent together. But it is very, very rare that I would call a parent without the student, regardless of what legal documentation is behind the student. That's just good practice from the university perspective. Also keep in mind, particularly at large places, like I said in my introduction, there's between 42 and 48,000 students here. The chances of me actually knowing whether your student went to class today are fairly slim unless I talk to your student first. There's about 2,000 students that my office works with, and so we do a good job of tracking them, but we can't track them every minute of every day.
For guardianship, for the legal aspect, is that just your college that does it to where you still contact the student first and get their permission to talk to their parents? Or do you think that's statewide?
I think that is what I will call university-wide. It is typically good practice at universities. Now, some of that's going to depend on what the disability is, and some of that's going to depend on the office. But the general rule for all university staff and faculty, regardless of what state you're in or what institution you're in, is that we're treating the students like adults, and so we're initiating conversation with the student first. So obviously, if a student is needing to be hospitalized or suicidal, or there's something tragic that has happened, those situations will rise above general practice. But the general practice for all of the practitioners that I know across the state and across the nation is to contact the student either with the parent or to contact the student first. Sometimes that contact is just to say, hey, John, I need to talk to your mom today. I wanted to let you know that what that contact is going to depend on the student. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay.
And also, you might want to touch on FERPA.
Right. So the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act prohibits all universities from discussing grades with faculty members. Again, in my experience, that's regardless of guardianship. Whether that's legally true or not, we err on the side of being safe. And so FERPA prohibits us from sharing grades. It prohibits us from sharing medical information or specific information about where a student is with a parent. Where that legislation came from, to be honest, is a number of parents who were separated, and that somebody would call the school asking for information on where their child was, and they would get that information, and then it would be used against the other parent in a divorce proceeding. So part of that is to protect the student and the family in general. Also keep in mind that college grades are different. I don't know if that's actually in this slide or not, but we'll skip to that. If students are used to getting grades on a weekly basis or even a quarterly basis, your university grades are going to depend on what class you're in. Sometimes an instructor does have weekly checkpoints, and so you'll know what your grade is as you're going along. I work with plenty of faculty who do that. I also work with plenty of faculty who have 2 exams in a 16-week semester. And so it's week 8 or 9 before you have any numerical sense of how you're doing in the class. One of the things that catches all students by surprise is the amount of time that you theoretically have when you're in college, particularly because you're in class maybe 5 to 6 hours a day if you're taking 15 hours and if you're taking courses that meet Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Lots of students are surprised by the supposed amount of free time. It's technically not free. For every hour that you're in class, meaning every hour that you're sitting in an instructor's classroom or working with an instructor one-on-one, or in a lab, you should be spending 3 to 4 hours preparing for that class each week. So if the class is 3 hours, if you get 3 credit hours, that means you're spending 12 to 15 hours outside of that class time preparing for that class time. That could be, lots of students wait until 8 o'clock at night to start studying. We try to break folks of that habit and say, if you're free between 1 and 5, maybe you should work on your chemistry between 1 and 5 in the afternoon. But that is a scheduling thing that not just students with disabilities, all of our students seem to have a hard time adjusting to that. So the other thing that students need to adjust to is the difference in how your instructor is going to manage their class. Professors should be giving every student a syllabus at the beginning of the semester. That syllabus has all of the university policies. It has all of the class policies. It should have all of the due dates. And the instructors expect you to read that. And sometimes instructors will even have what they call a syllabus quiz to make sure that you're working on track. They are open to be helpful, but don't be surprised if you call an instructor or email an instructor and say, hey, when is project 2 due? The instructor is very likely to say, check your syllabus. And an instructor is not going to approach a student about accommodations. Again, it is the student who needs to bring that forward. And here's the 12 to 15 hours a week that we just talked about. And here's more detail about that. So the academic calendar at a university is usually 2 16 to 17 week semesters, with the last week being a finals week. And students have the opportunity to arrange their own schedule. At lots of institutions, students are arranging schedules before they've made contact with the Disability Services Office, and that has everything to do with, I can't register a student for accommodations until they have classes. Where students are getting classes is in orientation. So you're coming to orientation usually before you've met with an SDS office or an SDS representative, which means that students may want to volunteer to an academic advisor. Hey, I use accommodations and therefore I need to leave some time for additional time testing. Or I use accommodations and I don't think it's a good idea to have 16 hours my first semester. You can always call an SDS office and ask them if they would be happy to go through your schedule with you. Most of us can't actually change a student schedule, but we can kind of pinpoint for you where there might be difficulty or whether that looks like a good combination.
When do you think it's a good time and or an appropriate time for a student to disclose to their college and or university that they need accommodations?
Some schools, although not many, certainly not many in Florida, will actually ask for that information during the admissions process. USF does not. So all students have to be admitted through the same criteria. If a student is denied admission and the student believes that there are disability reasons that somebody needs to know about, they can appeal. At least for USF, all of those appeals come to the SDS office, and we review them and determine whether a student is otherwise qualified. For the most part, most of those appeals are being upheld, meaning if a student was denied, I'm looking at them and saying, yeah, it makes sense that we denied the student. There are a few exceptions to that. If a student, let's say they have leukemia and they came out of remission in their junior year and so their grades fell, or They have really, really strong academic grades, which are a great predictor of college success, and they bombed the SATs or the ACTs. Those are places where you can look and say, with the exception of this particular thing, the student is otherwise qualified. What gets difficult is when you're looking at somebody who has low test scores and just average grades. They may be a phenomenal student, but typically we would refer them to a community college and suggest that they transfer into the four-year school. But for the most part, I think what students need to understand about disclosing is not necessarily when, but who. So again, because that information goes with the student, if the student hasn't said anything to their academic advisor, there's no way that their academic advisor will know, either at the beginning of the relationship or even as they're graduating. Just because a student discloses to SDS, what that means is that the student has disclosed to an SDS office, and we've given them permission to get accommodation letters that they can then decide whether they go to faculty or they go to academic advisors. But if the student says, I don't want to give that letter to anybody, then for all intents and purposes, the student isn't using accommodations.
And at our college, for community colleges, state colleges, because we're open access institutions, which means anybody who applies is eligible to come in, it's going to vary. With Senate Bill 1720, and if a student starts 9th grade and graduates 12th grade from a Florida high school, they don't have to take the placement test if they're in a public high school. So they would not need to disclose before they enroll in classes or sign up for classes. However, if they do need to take the placement test and they need accommodations for the placement test, they would want to disclose before they make a schedule with an advisor. So it's going to vary by the student. If they go to a private school, private high school, they have to take the placement test or the SAT or ACT. And if they don't meet college level and they have to take the placement test at a college, it would be important that they disclose before the test.
And I think the other thing about at least four-year institutions is if a student is disclosing because let's say they need an interpreter for an admissions interview, or they need additional time on a placement test, those disclosures are usually situation specific, which means if you've disclosed to the testing center that you need additional time on a placement test, that does not mean that that disclosure follows the student to SDS or to any of their other classes. So a lot of times students will get frustrated and say, I disclosed this to the testing center, or I disclosed this to student health. How come you don't know about it? If a student hasn't specifically disclosed information to an SDS office, in all likelihood, that student isn't getting the accommodations that they need. In terms of tutoring, one of the things that all students have to get used to is that universities, tutoring is not automatic, and at least at my institution, the SDS office has very little to do with tutoring. We will coordinate with the Academic Success Center and the library to see what options are available to a student. If we need to do some awareness training about how a tutor would work with somebody with a specific disability, we can do that, either if the tutoring center requested or the student does. But I don't have any tutors who work specifically for the Disability Services Office. That's different depending on the institution. In terms of testing, I hinted at this a little bit. Tests for university students are usually, they cover more material and they're less frequent. Makeup tests are not necessarily an option for any student. What a student with a disability needs to understand is that accommodations do not mean that you can retake the test or that you can have a makeup test because you don't do well. The results on the test are not the indicator of whether the accommodations were provided. Grades, I think we've talked about a little bit as well. A lot of college courses have grades that are given at the end of the semester. A lot of universities now are moving to what they call online course platforms. Even if the class is delivered in person, there's a place where the student can log in and monitor, did the instructor receive the assignments? That's the same place where a student will very often see a syllabus. The most common course platforms that I know about are either Canvas or Blackboard. We tend to use Canvas, but Blackboard's also out there. Those are usually password driven. So they are driven by the student's login information and the student's password. Almost all students sign that they are not supposed to be giving that password to anyone. That includes parents. So if you're logging in on behalf of your student, do not share that information with the university official. You could be causing your student more trouble than you recognize. In terms of testing, again, most colleges and most majors have GPA requirements. So you need a 2.0 or higher in order to graduate. That means that you need a C average. Graduation requirements for universities are often fairly complex. There's everything from the number of hours that you have to take at a specific campus to state requirements to major requirements. And it's not quite as simple as I thought I wanted to be a chemistry major and now I'm going to switch and become a psychology major. Not all of your credits that you took if you switch majors will apply. And of course, in this particular administration, under this governor, there are sometimes penalties for students who have what they call excess hours. So it's a good idea for a student to talk to a lot of people as they're making decisions about what they want to study. Talk to financial aid, talk to the SDS office, talk to your academic advisor so that you get a lot of perspective on what that switch could mean for you. I think most of these have been touched on already, but university learning is based on results. Effort is important. But effort is usually not going to mean that a student who has poor grades in a class is going to pass the class. And it's certainly not going to mean that if you pass one, you're going to continue that way. And again, I know several people talked about problem solving. That applies here as well.
Deb, before you, I want you to keep control, by the way, but just touching on what you just said there, knowing yourself as a student or parents, knowing your child, maybe full-time enrollment is not going to be right for your child when they first get started. So just consider that. A student doesn't have to be enrolled 12 credit hours or 15 credit hours, especially at the state community college level. We often have students who will come in and do 3/4 time, which is 9 credit hours, or sometimes even half time. Whenever I'm out meeting with students in the high schools, I look at your degree as a sandwich. To understand that. Some students are going to sit and gulp their sandwich down in 5 or 6 bites, and it might take you 10 or 15 bites to get through it, and thinking about semester times. And it's okay, it doesn't matter how long it takes for you to eat your sandwich as long as you do finish your sandwich. So keep that in mind. Full-time enrollment is not always the best choice for every student, and we'll work with students on helping them through that process.
I think that's a great point, even at a 4-year institution. And for students who are using financial aid, there is the impression that you have to be enrolled full-time in order to receive financial aid. That's not true. Mm-hmm. What is true for most financial aid is that you have to have a minimum of 6 hours. And students who register for 12 hours, so you register for full-time, and then halfway through the semester, you drop down to 6, very often have to pay that money back because the institution and the federal government have given that student money for 12 hours. If a student is unsure, or if a family is unsure about whether part-time or full-time is better, from a financial aid perspective, the student is better off taking 6 hours, completing those hours, and getting the money only for those 6 hours. It does have impacts on what you have to live on and those kinds of things. But the students that I work with who have the most financial difficulty in terms of financial aid penalties are people who are registering for more hours than they intend to complete and then dropping those hours at the very end.
Yeah. Okay, so Deb, if you can advance to the next slide. Don't switch it over to me because we're going back and forth here at the end.
Okay.
Thank you. One other thing on that last part too is often if a student is financial aid eligible and they're full financial aid eligible, if they did 9 hours in fall and 9 hours in spring, they would have enough aid to do 6 hours in summer. So it allows them to extend their financial aid through the whole academic year. Whereas a lot of the university students, they do full-time for fall and spring because maybe they go home for summer. And so that's another way that community colleges, state colleges are a little bit different than the traditional university attending students. So then what does it take? What are the steps for you to attend college? The most important step is, first of all, to complete an application to the college for which you would like to attend. If you are the parent or a student who is looking at going into universities, it's important to review their website. A lot of the universities have application deadlines, and if you don't make the application deadline, you won't be considered for that term. So fall term, it's really, really critical that you start your application process usually about a year in advance if you're looking at the universities. The state community colleges, because we have we're open access institutions, you can pretty much complete your application in August and start classes the end of August. But we always encourage students to get an earlier start. I get a lot of calls from parents right before winter break, which I love, or spring break. They'll often come in, we'll talk around winter break, and they'll come in and do a tour of the college during spring break time. And so it gives them a good opportunity to take their time and make sure they're making the right selection for the student or for their child. As I mentioned, if you are not at a public high school, that you might have to take the ACT, the SAT, or the placement test. We use the PERT placement test at our college, and I think most of the state colleges are using the PERT, which is the Postsecondary Education Readiness Test. Please note that these are not pass-fail tests. They're there to tell us where you are reading, writing, or English skills are, and your math skills are, so that you can be placed in the college courses that match your achievement level. It's important that you request an official high school transcript be sent to the college for which you plan to attend, or that you've been accepted to attend and that you're going to enroll. If you're a high school graduate, you have to wait until all your grades post because your transcript has to show you've officially been graduated. If you have your high school transcript mailed to your home, it will come in an envelope that says, if seal is broken, this is no longer an official transcript. So be sure not to open the transcript until you get to the college or university to turn it in, if you're choosing to turn it in by hand. At our college, we have new student orientation. Universities usually have some type of new student orientation as well. Students, as Deb mentioned, we're student support services, but disability services offices, we do not register students. We're not academic advisors. We're specialists in understanding disabilities. So it's really, really important that they meet with an advisor and they register for classes. I like to meet with the student before they meet with an advisor so that we could talk about what classes they might want to take based on the disability documentation that they presented and based on their placement test scores. Because if they've tested into preparatory developmental education courses in all three areas, I'm going to say you might want to start with your reading courses first, or your reading and writing, and let's save the math till next time. Where an advisor is going to say, we're going to put you in a developmental ed reading, writing, and math class. That wouldn't be our recommendation, because we know that you have a learning disability in all 3 areas, and we want you to focus on just mainly reading and writing first, so you can get a strong foundation there, and then we'll start to add math after that. So that's just like one example. But we can give you examples of some other courses you can take, and we can also ask the advisor to do an override of that math hole to get you registered. So we help with those kind of conversations if needed. And biggest thing is, once a student registers for classes, they have to request their accommodations through the Disability Service Office, and they have to come back every term, and they have to come back if they're having any problems. I think you're next, Deb.
Okay. So a few more things about college success. The student needs to take control of education. Think of yourself as a full-time scholar, as if that's your 40 to 60 hour a week job. Get to know your instructors. Sometimes that can be daunting, because some classes will have, 100 to 200 students. Instructors respond better to, they're just like the rest of us. We all respond better to people that we know. Create your own support system, so study groups. Get to know people in the library. Again, at a university, we are depending on the student being able to do that. We talked about taking control of your time. Take courses that will force you to develop skills you don't have. I think that's great advice for your second and third year. I think for a first year, particularly first semester, there's a lot of challenge in coming to a place this big. And so it may be that for your first semester, the challenge is getting used to being here. And then enroll with SDS. One of the things that makes me very, very sad is to work with a graduating senior or a junior, somebody who, if I had been working with for the first 2 years, I might have been able to influence differently. And now we've got bigger issues because the student wasn't aware of the SDS office or chose not to come in.
And I think, to dovetail off what Deb just said there, it's really, really important. If often with high school students, high school seniors especially, they've taken all their hard courses, and in their senior year, they're maybe doing work study and taking a lighter academic load because they've done all that hard academic work. And so they're not utilizing their accommodations as much. And so when they're getting ready to transition to college, they're like, I really don't want to have an IEP anymore. I don't want to be known as a student with disabilities. Or I didn't need my accommodations as much in my senior year, so I'm not going to request them. In college, it's really, really important that they consider requesting accommodations in college from the first semester moving forward. You can choose not to use your accommodations, but you have to request them before the semester starts and have them put in place before classes begin. And if you take your first test with accommodations and you find you didn't need them, then you can always opt to take the second exam without them. You just have to communicate that with your professor in the SDS office. And then if you don't do well on that second exam, you could opt back into them for the next exam. But if you start without them and you make an F grade, or maybe you make a low C or a D on the first test, and you're like, oh, that's okay, I didn't study hard, and you make, you talk through it in your head and you say, I can just work harder and do better. And then the second exam you make an F, not disclosed to our office. First of all, accommodations are not retroactive, so they're only going to be, you'll only get accommodations on that third and final exam. And so it's really, really important that you set them up. I say try them first. If you feel like you don't need them and you want to opt out for one class, that's fine. If you're strong in math but not in English, you might want to request them in English and not in math. The thing about college life is that you get to pick and choose when and how and where you use your disability in your accommodations and where you disclose your disability. So, but it's better to have them set up and have everything in place and then opt out of them later, in my opinion. Do you agree on that, Deb?
I would. I do agree with that. The one thing that I would clarify is that if a student has not requested accommodations at the beginning of the semester and something happens, so you break a leg or you have maybe you were in remission and your cancer returns. Students can request accommodations all the way through the semester. The challenge is that whatever grades you've earned prior to requesting those accommodations will stand. So if you request accommodations in week 6 of the semester, whatever you've done weeks 1 through 5 will stand. The accommodations only apply moving forward.
Right. Okay, and so then the last is, I think we've pretty much gone over everything, but I like to go over this one last just because it's so important. Students often forget to come back every semester after they disclose to our office, and they find themselves at their midterm exam and they tell the professor, I'm supposed to have extended time, and it's often too late to get those accommodations set up before the exam. So it's important that they come in every semester and request their accommodations, to speak with their professor about their accommodations prior to the first class, if possible. At our college, our professors have to post their syllabus a week in advance so that students have an opportunity to review the syllabus. So when you're looking at your syllabus, if you have questions about it or you are concerned about structure in the class, those are the conversations that it's important that you have with the professor prior to the first class meeting, because we only have a 1-week drop add window in college. And so if you don't feel like this professor's teaching style is going to match your learning style, it would be important that you drop add before the class starts so you can get on a fresh start for a full term in another class versus starting a week late. Paying your tuition and your fees by the payment deadline, again, that's the most heartbreaking experience I often hear, especially with newer students. You learn from your mistakes. Usually they only make that mistake one time, but it's really, really important, especially when you work really hard to get a calendar or a schedule that meets maybe your work schedule, your home life, all your other obligations outside of school. We encourage all students to complete an application for financial aid, which is the FAFSA application, free application for federal student aid. You can find that at www.fafsa.gov. The reason being is your family may not be financial aid eligible and you fall under the income of your parents until you're 24 years old. But if you want to apply for scholarships, most scholarships require that you have a FAFSA application on file. So FAFSA applications are used for more than just Pell Grants. They can also be used for scholarship opportunities. If you are driving to and from school or you're living on campus, you're going to need to get a parking decal. At our college, we're a community state college, parking decals are free, but you do have to fill out a form with our security office. I'm sure at the university, when I went there, I had to pay. I'm an alumni of USF, so most universities—
Yeah, parking's not free at most for you.
So just know that has FSCJ on that slide. So at FSCJ, it's still free to park, but it's okay. And then you have to get an identification card. You need your identification card to access the library, the tutoring centers, the computer labs, all those free resources that are out there for our students. The public often try to come into our campuses and utilize those services. And so for us to be sure that we have services for our students, they require an identification card to get in. And then the last slide for me is just the last bullet point is work hard and have fun. If you apply yourself in college, you put forth hard faith effort and you persist even when you feel like you are meeting every challenge out there. As long as you're utilizing your resources, you're talking with your family, you're communicating with your professors in our office. I've seen students get through the hardest and most difficult time. So work hard and have fun and consider coming into, whether it's a tech center, community college, state college, or a university. Consider your post-secondary educational options. If not, consider working, because it's going to be a fun life out there in your transition. But employment is always an option, going directly to work. So.
I think the only thing I would add is to keep in mind, particularly for families, that having a disability or being registered with the Disability Services Office does not usually mean that we can influence when those fees or applications or things are due. So every year I get people who say, well, I didn't apply for the scholarship because I have ADD and I forgot, or I had a bad day with my, I don't know what just happened. I hit something. I had a bad day with my disability and I didn't get the FAFSA turned in, or I didn't get my homework turned in on time. And unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do about changing deadlines. So I somehow lost the slide presentation, but I think that was it. There we go.
Are there any questions out there?
I do not see any questions on Facebook, but I do want to say thank you for dispelling the myths and giving us a way to enroll our students that have exceptionalities in college, and giving them tidbits and giving them all of the information and knowledge. It is appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right. And I will take the screen back. Thank you all for joining us today. We are truly, truly excited and grateful that you all signed in and had an opportunity to know what the Common Exchange is in order to get to those post-secondary outcomes. So thank you very much, and hopefully you will reach out to us at fndusa.org, or if you saw presentations today that you would like and would like a copy of them, please feel free to email myself, Tasha at fndfl.org, or fnd@fndusa.org. Thank you.
And please remember that FND does have youth advocates, as myself, throughout the entire state to help you transition through the different stages. We can help, and that way, one-on-one through the classroom, if we're invited in the classroom, either in person, local cafe, or through webinars such as what we're doing now. So thank you so much for your time today.
All right.